The headline that Donald Trump shared highly sensitive intelligence with Russian officials may have gotten buried under this week's avalanche of news. But for a brief 24 hours, a debate erupted within the media about how the story was disclosed and whether intelligence sources and methods had been compromised. In that now infamous Oval Office meeting, Donald Trump boasted to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov how the U.S. learned about an ISIS plot to place bombs in laptop computers.
Tonight, this exclusive Washington Post story is causing a major stir.
But officials urged the Post to withhold most of the details out of concern it would jeopardize intelligence capabilities, and the Post complied.
This is information about the fight against ISIS that is so sensitive that the U.S. doesn't even share it with our allies. It could jeopardize the source of the secret.
But those arguments didn't sway the New York Times, which reported that the ISIS intelligence came from Israel, and the rest of the media followed suit.
Some of the information came from Israel. There's now concern Russia could share that intelligence with some of its allies like Iran, an enemy of Israel.
Meanwhile, CNN says it had many of those details back in March, but that Trump administration officials told them in no uncertain terms reporting the full story would cost lives.
And subsequently, CNN executives to not report certain details about the threat, including the city from which some of the intelligence was collected.
Regardless, the Trump administration is denying that Trump's disclosures were even that sensitive.
It was nothing that you would not know from open source reporting in terms of a source of concern.
Sounds like there's a lot of sources who would beg to differ. You know what I find most interesting about this is that you know how you always wonder where an alert comes from and where a threat comes from? Oh, laptop computers are going to be compromised. This kind of gives you a trail. So from a journalist perspective, it puts things in a greater perspective. So I, for one, appreciate the greater detail. On the other hand, I understand the threat of compromising intelligence capabilities, because once one thing is out there, another door can open, and before you know it, you've got all this cross connection going. Because think about how many spies or whatever the current term is out there for everybody who's intelligence collecting across the world, and all this cross-information leaking out.
This particular case was, like you mentioned, eye-opening for me, because we do report a lot of information that government officials pass along, that you can't have a laptop or take your shoes off or whatever it might be, and we don't understand the genesis of it all. But I think that this comes up time and time again, where you have to, as a news organization, you have to listen to what officials are telling you. Sometimes it's law enforcement officials in a local matter, and they're telling you don't go out with this information because they're using it to catch who the killer might be or someone like that. And I think you have to go case by case and say, is this in fact something that could impede this investigation, or is this in the greater interest, the public needs to know about this and we have to put it out there? And I think you just can't make a blanket decision on this. You have to do it case by case.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I wish I had a better understanding of why the New York Times decided it was okay to report that this came from Israel. Maybe they had information that the Russians already knew it, so it didn't really matter.
Trump told them.
Trump told them. There you go. Because it seemed that the Washington Post made the right call in revealing as much as they could about this without actually providing those kinds of details. And I was really surprised that the Times went one step further. I'm not going to criticize the Times without knowing more, but it just seemed like well,
I thought they implied that Trump
decision.
Did tell the Russians that they came from Israel.
Well, I mean, the original Washington Post story made one think that he did not tell them that, but maybe he did.
I interpreted the original story as that he told them it becomes unclassified because he's the president, but they were now concerned, don't say where, because that threatens somebody's lives. That's how I took it. So my read of this is that the Washington Post story was first, and then the Times had a day in between, I believe, and they had enough information to say, oh, they fell for the okie doke. They believed them, and we would have if we had gone first, but we didn't go first. So here, boom, we're saying who it is because you just said that, and you were wrong, and you're trying to throw us off, and this is what we're going to do. We're now going to print it. But that's my feeling about it. I can't say it doesn't make me nervous thinking about, as a regular civilian, is there somebody's life? You know, and this, by the way, is one of our strongest allies. So I'd like to be in the room when he's talking to Israel in a couple of days about having dropped the name and dropped a dime on some guy who's probably in danger's way now.
Two things quickly. Do we know conclusively that was in fact intelligence that came from Israel? Because I remember reading a pretty convincing argument that it may have been a Jordanian source who had infiltrated ISIS and was able to provide this info. So I'm not sure that we know, in fact.
Well, the New York Times is saying it.
That's what the Times
We're going with the New York
said.
Times here, Adam.
This is sense that. So I think it's not entirely clear that's correct. Also, I think one argument for disclosure of the origins is presumably after the president, if in fact he did do this, share this information with the Russians as reported, he outed the source in a way that that is much more important than the press outing them a few days after, because presumably by that point in time, Russia has already done whatever they're going to with the info that he.
That's what I just said.
Right.
They fell for the okey doke. You fell for the okey doke, and now
I like that term.
Now
Fell for the okey doke.
Okay, well,
just to repeat that, that's originally from Callie, not from me. I can take no credit. I do wonder.
It's in the footnotes. It'll be in the footnotes.
Yeah.